Liel shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Their light danced across polished silverware and gleaming wine glasses. The soft strains of a violin mingled with the hushed murmurs of diners, business titans, A-list celebrities, and the city's elite. Amelia, clad in a simple black uniform, moved with practiced grace between the tables, balancing a tray laden with bottles of red wine. Her smile remained flawless, yet behind her eyes lurked a weariness that went unnoticed by all. Amelia, all of 25 years old, was accustomed to the long, grueling night shifts at Liel. She toiled tirelessly from sunset until dawn, all to earn enough to support her ailing mother and younger sister, and to gradually chip away at the millions of dollars in debt her father had left in his wake before his sudden disappearance. Once a respected businessman, he had suffered a catastrophic fall from grace, going bankrupt after a string of disastrous investments, leaving his family to drown in shame and crippling debt. Amelia didn't harbor any resentment toward him. She simply yearned to forget the past and protect what little remained. Her mother, whose health was steadily declining, and Lily, her 16-year-old sister, who still clung to her dreams of attending college. Tonight, Liel was even busier than usual. Amelia navigated through the throng of unfamiliar faces, meticulously remembering each and every request. One guest craved sugar-free wine, another demanded a gluten-free dessert. She operated with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, carefully concealing any flicker of emotion. But as she approached table 12, she felt an almost palpable chill in the air. The man seated alone exuded an aura of such immense power that no one dared venture near. Lucian Vale, 32 years old, a tech billionaire and the city's most talked-about name, a constant fixture in both business articles and scandalous gossip columns. Tonight, he was dressed in a flawlessly tailored black suit. His hair meticulously combed back, but his eyes were as sharp and cold as newly forged blades. On the table before him sat an untouched glass of whiskey, beside a phone that persistently lit up with notifications. Lucian hadn't come to Liel for the culinary experience. He had come to hide, to escape the prying eyes and the scathing headlines that followed Vivian's, his fiancée, decision to call off their engagement right before the launch event of his company's highly anticipated new product. Billionaire left at the altar, one particularly cruel tabloid had mocked. Lucian felt as though the entire world was collectively laughing at his misfortune. He wasn't accustomed to rejection. He wasn't accustomed to losing control. And tonight, he simply craved a dark, secluded corner in which to nurse his anger and humiliation. Oblivious to the latest high society drama, Amelia approached his table with the extra bottle of red wine he had requested. She poured it with practiced care and professionalism, but her hand trembled ever so slightly, a consequence of working 12 consecutive hours without a single break. In a fleeting moment of distraction, the glass tilted, spilling a few drops of wine onto the sleeve of Lucian's immaculate suit, leaving a faint red stain. The world seemed to grind to a halt. Lucian looked up, his eyes flaring with incandescent rage. Amelia bowed slightly. "I'm very sorry, sir." He stood abruptly, the legs of his chair screeching against the polished wooden floor. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice cut through the air like shards of ice. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? Your entire month's salary wouldn't even begin to cover it." Conversations throughout the restaurant ceased. Curious eyes turned in their direction. Staff members behind the bar exchanged anxious glances. Amelia felt the weight of the collective scrutiny, but she refused to lower her head in shame. Instead, she took a deep, steadying breath, placed the wine tray on the table, and looked Lucian directly in the eye. The eyes that usually appeared soft, a calculated attempt to mask her inner pain, now blazed with a quiet strength. "If yelling made you more powerful," she said, her voice calm and clear, "you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight." The entire restaurant fell silent. The violin abruptly stopped mid-note, as if even the musician was stunned by the audacity of her words. A few guests gasped audibly. One woman discreetly covered her mouth to stifle a smile. Lucian, a man who routinely made seasoned negotiators tremble with a single glance, stood speechless, utterly disarmed. He stared at Amelia, this seemingly insignificant woman in her plain uniform, her eyes presenting a wall he couldn't penetrate. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was truth. A truth he desperately didn't want to confront. Amelia didn't wait for his response. She bowed slightly, not submissively, but politely, and turned away, resuming her duties as if nothing of significance had occurred. She carried the now empty tray back to the bar, her steps measured and steady, even though her heart was pounding furiously against her ribs. She was acutely aware that she had just invited trouble. Lucian Vale was not the kind of man to tolerate being publicly embarrassed without seeking swift and merciless retaliation. But she didn't regret her words. She'd spent her entire life laboring under the crushing weight of debt and humiliation, and she wasn't about to allow some pampered, obscenely wealthy man to crush what little pride she had left. Lucian sank back into his chair, his fingers tightening around his whiskey glass. The stain on his suit sleeve suddenly seemed insignificant. He wasn't consumed by anger anymore. He was, in a word, stunned. For the first time in years, someone had addressed him without fear or flattery. This seemingly insignificant girl, with words as sharp as knives, had struck unerringly at his most vulnerable point. His profound loneliness. Vivian had left him, not out of love, but because she no longer perceived any value in him. And now a nameless waitress had exposed that painful truth for all to see. He watched Amelia as she served another table, her smile back in place as if their confrontation had never taken place. Who was she? Why had she dared to speak to him that way? And why, even if only for a fleeting moment, had he felt so utterly small and insignificant in her presence? Henry, Liel's anxious manager, rushed over, apologizing profusely and offering compensation. But Lucian waved him off dismissively, his eyes still fixated on Amelia. "No need," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "What's her name?" Henry hesitated, clearly unsure of what to say. "Amelia, sir. Amelia Harper. She's a good worker, just a little clumsy tonight." Lucian didn't listen further. He nodded curtly, stood, left a conspicuously generous bill on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. But in his mind, her words echoed like a haunting melody he couldn't silence. "If yelling made you more powerful, you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight." Back at the bar, Amelia exhaled slowly as she watched Lucian leave. She had no inkling that from that moment forward, her life had irrevocably veered onto a new and treacherous path. A path that Lucian Vale, with all his immense power and icy determination, would not allow her to stray from so easily. Lucian Vale's mansion perched precariously high on a hillside, encircled by towering glass panels that provided a breathtaking panoramic view of the city glittering with countless lights. Inside the vast, opulent living room, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock, amplifying the palpable silence. Lucian, still wearing the same impeccably tailored suit from Liel, sat slumped in a leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, untouched. His eyes, usually sharp and fiercely alert, were now clouded with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The waitress's words, Amelia's words, echoed incessantly in his mind like a discordant melody he was powerless to silence. "If yelling made you more powerful, you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight." Lucian Vale was a man who meticulously controlled every facet of his existence, from multi-billion-dollar deals to the subtle expressions of his rivals in corporate boardrooms. He had painstakingly built his sprawling tech empire from absolutely nothing, overcoming a childhood marked by profound lack and constant ridicule. But tonight, for the first time in his adult life, he felt utterly powerless. A waitress, a woman who possessed nothing of material value beyond her worn uniform, had left him speechless, humiliated in front of a room full of people. She hadn't cowered in fear. She hadn't trembled obsequiously like so many others. She had simply looked him directly in the eye and spoken the unvarnished truth, the very truth he had desperately tried to conceal beneath countless layers of power and wealth. He stood abruptly, slamming the whiskey glass onto the nearby table, causing the amber liquid to spill onto the polished wood. He wasn't angry at Amelia, not exactly. He was angry at himself. Why did that single sentence resonate so profoundly within him? Why couldn't he shake the image of the fire in her eyes, as if she had effortlessly seen straight through his carefully constructed facade? Lucian walked to the expansive window, staring down at the sprawling city below. Who is she? He muttered to himself, his voice low and rough. His phone buzzed insistently on the table, shattering the silence. Vivian's name lit up the screen. Lucian frowned, hesitated for a long moment, then finally answered. Vivian's voice, sharp and supremely confident, came through immediately. Lucian, I just wanted to make it crystal clear. I'm not coming back. The deal with your company tanked. My shares are worthless now. What did you think I'd stay for? Love? She let out a mocking, mirthless laugh. Lucian clenched the phone tightly in his fist, but his voice remained remarkably cold and calm. You made your choice, Vivian. I don't keep people around who don't want to stay. He hung up before she could utter another word, tossing the phone carelessly onto the nearby sofa. Vivian hadn't simply left him. She had done it publicly, in spectacular fashion, transforming him into a punchline for the entire world to mock. And now another woman, Amelia, had dared to challenge him, to undermine his carefully cultivated image. Even if it was just with a single, cutting sentence, he couldn't allow this to continue. Lucian Vale didn't lose. Ever. He picked up the internal phone and called Marcus, his ever-present assistant, who was always on call, regardless of the hour. Find out everything you can about a woman named Amelia Harper, he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. She works at Liel. I want it all. Family, background, finances, every single detail. I want the complete file on my desk by morning. Though accustomed to Lucian's unpredictable commands, Marcus still hesitated slightly. Sir, is there a particular issue with her? Don't ask questions, Lucian snapped, cutting him off abruptly. Just do it. When the call ended, Lucian sat back down at his desk, his eyes scanning the framed items meticulously arranged on the nearby shelves. Not family photos, but glossy magazine articles celebrating his extraordinary success, prestigious awards he had painstakingly earned. But tonight, they held no meaning, offered no solace. He opened his laptop and typed Amelia Harper into the search bar, but nothing of significance appeared. No social media presence, no feature articles, no discernible trace of her existence. She was like a ghost, an enigma, and that only intensified his curiosity, his unwavering determination to unravel the mystery. How could someone so seemingly invisible shake him so profoundly, striking at the very core of his being? The next morning, Marcus arrived at the mansion carrying a slim manila file. Amelia Harper, age 25. He began, placing the folder on Lucian's expansive desk. She was a full scholarship law student at Stanford, but dropped out 3 years ago after her father, Richard Harper, declared bankruptcy. He owed millions to various banks and private lenders, then subsequently disappeared. Amelia now works nights at Liel and days at a local cafe in an attempt to pay off the enormous debt. The total is close to $1 million, and the house her mother lives in is currently facing foreclosure. Lucian flipped through the file, his eyes settling on the attached photograph of Amelia in her Liel uniform, a faint, almost wistful smile playing on her lips, but unmistakable exhaustion etched around her eyes. Mother and sister, he murmured, reading from an accompanying note. They depend on her. Correct, Marcus added. Her mother, Ella Lehner, suffers from a severe heart condition and is unable to work. Her sister, Lily, is 16 and still in high school. Amelia is the sole provider. Lucian nodded slowly and closed the file. An idea flickered in his mind, cold and calculating, like every other ruthless plan he had ever devised. If Amelia was bold enough to challenge him, he would demonstrate to her, in no uncertain terms, that no one crossed Lucian Vale without facing severe consequences. And this overwhelming debt, nearly $1 million, was the key to unlocking her submission. He could use it to control her, to force her hand, and, perhaps more importantly, to prove to Vivian that he was never the one who relinquished control. Call the law firm, Lucian ordered, his eyes still fixed on the file. I want to purchase all of Richard Harper's outstanding debt. Use a third party. Keep my name out of it completely, and make it happen as quickly as possible. Marcus nodded dutifully, though his mind was racing with unanswered questions. Sir, what exactly do you plan to do with her? Lucian didn't respond directly. He rose from his desk and walked to the window, watching the city gradually awaken beneath him. The plan was already meticulously forming in his mind. Amelia Harper would soon realize that she wasn't simply up against another arrogant billionaire. She had unwittingly entered a treacherous game where he dictated the rules, and he always, without fail, emerged victorious. He picked up her file once more, his finger tracing her name printed in bold letters. His gaze was icy, devoid of warmth, but deep inside, a flicker of curiosity still burned. You'll understand soon enough, he said, his voice low and imbued with a sense of grim determination, like a declaration of war. No one challenges me and gets away with it. 1 week after the unsettling incident at Liel, Amelia received a pristine white envelope delivered directly to the restaurant's front desk. Inside was a formal invitation, the elegant gold lettering printed on thick, luxurious paper requesting her presence at the Grand Meridian Hotel on Friday evening to meet with Lucian Vale. No explanation was offered, just a single, vaguely ominous sentence. We need to talk. Amelia frowned, tore the card in half with a defiant rip, and tossed it into the trash. If Lucian imagined that a belated apology could somehow smooth over her wounded pride, he was sorely mistaken. She didn't need or want pity from an arrogant, entitled billionaire. Across the city, high on the 50th floor of Vale Enterprises headquarters, Lucian received Marcus's report confirming that Amelia had rejected his carefully worded invitation. He gripped the expensive pen in his hand tightly, a volatile mixture of irritation and undeniable fascination bubbling within him. No one refused him, especially not a waitress, someone he considered to be so far beneath him. Who does she think she is? He muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing in thinly veiled anger, but deep down, he couldn't deny a grudging admiration for her unwavering defiance. She wasn't like Vivian, who had been drawn to his power and wealth. She wasn't like anyone he had ever encountered before, and he decided that she would ultimately have no choice but to come to him on his terms. 2 days later, just as Amelia finished her grueling shift at the small cafe where she worked during the day to supplement her income, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled up directly in front of the entrance. Marcus, impeccably dressed in a crisp, dark suit, stepped out of the vehicle and calmly blocked her path. Miss Harper, Mr. Vale would like to see you. The car is ready. Amelia crossed her arms defensively, her eyes wary and suspicious. I already told you, I'm not interested. If he wants to apologize, he can do it himself, right here. She turned to leave, attempting to brush past him, but Marcus's next words stopped her dead in her tracks. This is about your father's debt. Amelia spun around, her heart pounding erratically in her chest. What did you say? Marcus met her gaze unflinchingly, his voice steady and serious. Mr. Vale wants to discuss the debt of Mr. Richard Harper. You should come, Miss Harper. This is not a joke. Reluctantly, and with a growing sense of foreboding, Amelia got into the luxurious car, her mind racing with a whirlwind of unanswered questions and frightening possibilities. She didn't know what Lucian wanted, but if it had anything to do with the crippling debt that relentlessly threatened her mother and sister, she knew she couldn't afford to ignore it, no matter how much she might want to. The car glided smoothly through the city's brightly lit streets, eventually delivering her to the Grand Meridian Hotel, where a private conference room had been meticulously arranged. Lucian was already there, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, idly flipping through a file. When she entered the room, he looked up, his expression unreadable, betraying absolutely nothing of his thoughts or intentions. You're proving to be remarkably difficult to reach, Lucian said coolly, a subtle hint of sarcasm lacing his voice. Have a seat. Amelia remained standing, rooted to the spot. Just say what you want and get it over with. Lucian slid a document across the polished table toward her. Marriage contract. 3 months. You'll be my wife, and I'll make sure your family gets to keep their home, free and clear." Amelia stared at him, utterly stunned. Then she let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Is this some kind of sick joke? What kind of person do you think I am?" Lucian didn't laugh. He opened the file and methodically laid out the original debt documents in front of her, the glaring red numbers and her father's signature starkly visible, along with a grim foreclosure notice from the bank. "I've purchased the entire debt," he said, his voice as flat and unemotional as a financial report. "Close to $1 million. If you don't sign this contract, your mother's house will be seized within 72 hours. Your mother, Ella Lehner, and your sister, Lily, will be out on the street, with nowhere to go. Is that what you want?" Amelia felt her blood run cold. She stared at the documents, each word and number like a blade carving into her very soul. She wanted to scream, to grab the file and hurl it back in his face, but she couldn't. The numbers were undeniably real. The threat was terrifyingly real. And Lucian, with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, held all the power, manipulating her like a puppet on a string. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, but still surprisingly steady. "Why are you doing this to me?" Lucian tilted his head slightly, as if her question genuinely amused him. "Because I can, and because you intrigue me in a way that no other woman ever has." Amelia clenched her fists tightly, her fingernails digging painfully into the palms of her hands. She desperately wanted to say no, to walk out of that room and never look back, but the vivid image of her mother, frail and weak in her hospital bed, and Lily, still clinging to her dreams of attending college, stopped her cold. She had no real choice. Not because she feared Lucian, but because she couldn't bear to watch her family's life fall completely apart. "Give me some time to think about it," she said hoarsely. "One night," Lucian replied, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "My lawyer will meet with you in the morning." Amelia left the hotel in a daze, her mind reeling from the sheer audacity of his proposition. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window of her tiny, cramped apartment, staring out at the dark, deserted street below. The contract that Marcus had handed her sat on the table beside her, an unwelcome presence. She read it over and over, each clause feeling like an iron chain, binding her to a fate she couldn't possibly have imagined. 3 months as his wife, a sham marriage, devoid of love, completely devoid of emotion, just a calculated transaction. But in return, her family would be safe, secure. The crushing debt would be erased, lifted from their shoulders forever. She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible, "Just 3 months. I can survive this." The next morning, Amelia arrived at the sterile, impersonal law office that Lucian had designated. With trembling hands, she signed the contract, each stroke of the pen carving a fresh scar into her heart. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with an expressionless face, reviewed the signed papers and nodded curtly. "Everything is complete, Miss Harper. Mr. Vale will contact you regarding the wedding arrangements." Amelia stood, her fingers clutching the copy of the contract like a lifeline. She stepped out into the bright morning sun, its warmth doing little to penetrate the cold, gnawing emptiness inside her. Her eyes were resolute, betraying her inner turmoil, but her heart felt heavier than she had ever thought possible. She didn't know what the next 3 months would bring, but she made a silent, unwavering vow to herself. Lucian Vale might own her debt, might control her immediate future, but he would never, ever own her. The Grand Meridian Hotel, typically a picture of refined luxury, was adorned in unparalleled splendor for an event that the entire city was buzzing about: the highly publicized wedding of billionaire Lucian Vale. The grand ballroom overflowed with pristine white roses and glittering crystal chandeliers, reflecting the light in a dazzling display. Gold silk ribbons were meticulously wrapped around every marble column, and a full symphony orchestra played soft, romantic sonatas, creating an atmosphere of ethereal beauty. Outside the hotel, the ravenous media crowded together, their cameras flashing non-stop, eager to capture every moment of this so-called fairy tale romance that the tabloids had been relentlessly hyping for weeks. But inside, the atmosphere was as cold and hollow as an empty cathedral. Amelia stood silently before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite, wrapped in a custom-made white gown designed by a world-renowned couturier hired by Lucian. The dress was undeniably beautiful, exquisite in its detail, but to her, it felt no different than another uniform, just another costume she was being forced to wear, to play her assigned part in Lucian's carefully scripted charade. The makeup artist, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, tried to engage her in light conversation, but Amelia responded only with dull, perfunctory nods. She had no friends here, no family to offer support or comfort. Lucian had coldly instructed her mother and sister not to attend the wedding, citing security concerns and the potential chaos caused by the overwhelming media presence as an excuse. But Amelia knew the real reason behind his cruel decision. He didn't want her to have any source of comfort or strength on this, the most difficult day of her life. She walked slowly into the grand ballroom, her eyes scanning the assembled crowd, filled with unfamiliar faces. Lucian's business partners, investors, and a few well-known celebrities murmured among themselves, elegantly sipping champagne from slender flutes. No one knew who she was. No one cared about her thoughts or feelings. To them, she was simply Lucian Vale's mysterious bride, the latest convenient rumor to fuel their endless gossip. Amelia tightened her grip on the bouquet of carnations and kept her back ramrod straight. She would not allow them to see her falter, to witness any sign of weakness. Lucian stood at the end of the long aisle in a jet-black tuxedo, his face as unreadable as ever, devoid of emotion. He didn't smile, offer a reassuring word, or display any of the warmth and gentleness that a groom should. As Amelia approached, his eyes slid over her, not with admiration or affection, but with the detached appraisal of someone coldly inspecting a piece of merchandise. That only strengthened her resolve, hardening her heart. She would not allow him to control her emotions, to see how deeply his actions had wounded her. The ceremony proceeded quickly, efficiently, almost like a business deal being finalized. The officiant, a high-ranking government official whom Lucian had undoubtedly paid handsomely for his services, mechanically read the vows in a monotone. When it came time to exchange rings, Amelia looked at the sparkling diamond ring in Lucian's outstretched hand and shook her head slightly. "No need," she said quietly but firmly, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the crowd, but she didn't care. She simply picked up the expensive pen and signed the marriage certificate with a bold, unwavering hand, her way of stating unequivocally, "This wasn't love. It was a contract, nothing more." Lucian's brow furrowed slightly, his hand still awkwardly holding the ring midair. Amelia's steely gaze clearly unsettled him, though he would never publicly admit it. He had expected surrender, or at least a hint of fear, but she stood tall and proud, as if he weren't the one holding all the cards, controlling her fate. He slipped the ring back into his pocket and turned to the crowd with a forced, insincere smile. "She prefers things simple," he said, his voice raised just enough to smother the murmurings of the guests. But inside, a strange and unwelcome frustration simmered. The wedding reception unfolded with hollow toasts and performative handshakes. The cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every carefully staged moment for the voracious media. Headlines were already being typed. "Billionaire Lucian Vale marries mystery woman in wedding of the century." Amelia stood beside him, a strained smile plastered on her lips, her eyes hollow and distant. She heard the flattering praise, the shallow admiration, but in her mind only one truth rang clear. She was a product of this calculated deal, traded for the safety and security of her mother and sister. Lucian wasn't enjoying himself either. He moved through the crowd with polite nods and perfunctory greetings, his mind elsewhere. He had thought that this lavish wedding would be a triumph, a powerful way to prove to the world that he was still in complete control after Vivian's public betrayal. But Amelia's piercing, defiant stare made him feel like he was, in fact, losing. She didn't look at him like a wife, not even like a partner. She looked at him like an adversary, someone she fundamentally distrusted. When the interminable reception finally ended, they were escorted to the honeymoon suite, a lavish space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire glittering city. Lucian walked in first, carelessly tossing his jacket onto a nearby chair, his eyes still fixed intently on her. "You should feel exceptionally lucky," he said, his tone laced with thinly veiled mockery. "Not everyone gets to stand where you're standing." Amelia didn't respond. She simply stepped toward the expansive window, gazing down at the mesmerizing city lights below. This was their wedding night, the supposed start of their new life together. Yet there was no love, no closeness, just two strangers bound together by a piece of paper and a series of calculated manipulations. She turned to face him, her expression resolute and unwavering. "I don't need your luck," she said, her voice low but razor-sharp. "I'm here for my family, not for you." Lucian opened his mouth as if to retort, then stopped abruptly, seemingly unable to find the right words. Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving Amelia alone to face the vast, empty space and the uncertain future that lay before her. She sat down heavily in an armchair, tossing the now wilted bouquet of carnations onto a nearby table. She looked out at the sprawling city once more, her heart heavy, but her will unbroken. "I won't let him destroy me," she whispered to herself like a sacred vow. 3 months. She would endure it, and when it was finally over, she would reclaim her freedom, no matter the cost. Lucian Vale's mansion, perched atop a secluded hill with sweeping, unobstructed views of the city, was a stunning marvel of modern architecture, vast floor-to-ceiling glass walls, minimalist yet impossibly expensive furnishings, and expansive open spaces where even the softest footsteps seemed to echo endlessly. But to Amelia, it felt less like a home and more like a luxurious, gilded prison. After the cold, sterile wedding at the Grand Meridian, she had moved into the mansion, as stipulated in the terms of their meticulously crafted contract. From day one, she had requested a separate bedroom in the east wing of the sprawling house, as far away from Lucian's personal quarters as possible. He hadn't argued, merely shrugged with detached indifference, as if her presence held no real significance to him at all. Amelia's room was undeniably modest compared to the ostentatious extravagance of the rest of the house, but she greatly preferred its simple austerity: a comfortable bed, a functional desk, and a large window overlooking a tranquil garden. She had brought with her only a few cherished personal belongings: a framed photograph of herself with her mother and sister, Lily, an old, well-worn law textbook from her time at Stanford, and a soft wool scarf her mother had lovingly knitted for her. These were her anchors, her constant reminders that this life was only temporary, and that she did not truly belong in Lucian Vale's world. That day, Amelia stuck to her routine. She was up before dawn, quietly leaving the mansion before Lucian woke, and worked her morning shift at the cafe. In the evenings, she returned to Lucian, pointedly ignoring the curious stares of her coworkers, who were still buzzing with tabloid rumors about their sudden wedding. She absolutely refused to touch a single cent of Lucian's money, even though he'd left an unlimited credit card on her desk with a note that simply read, "Use if needed." Amelia promptly shoved it into a drawer and never gave it a second glance. She felt she owed him nothing more than what the strict terms of their contract stipulated. On weekends, she made it a point to visit her mother and sister at their small, unassuming suburban home. Though the house was old and a little worn around the edges, it was always filled with warmth and love. Ella, her mother, always weakened by illness, invariably attempted to prepare a simple, comforting meal for Amelia's visits. Lily, always sporting her signature ponytail and bright, infectious smile, would excitedly chatter about school, her ambitious dream of becoming a doctor, and crack silly jokes that always managed to make Amelia laugh out loud. These precious moments were her medicine, the only thing keeping her grounded and sane inside Lucian's opulent, yet suffocating mansion. Lucian, meanwhile, had started to take notice of her, although he was hesitant to admit it, even to himself. He was used to people trying to manipulate him, be they business partners, so-called friends, or even lovers. But Amelia was markedly different. She asked for nothing, never tried to flatter him or curry favor, and never sought his approval or validation. She lived in his home like a ghost, almost unnoticed, quiet, independent, and seemingly untouchable. He couldn't quite grasp why she insisted on continuing to work 2 jobs, even after he had secretly erased her family's substantial debt to save their beloved house from foreclosure. What more does she need? He wondered aloud, feeling equal parts annoyed and strangely intrigued. One afternoon, Lucian returned to the mansion earlier than usual after a particularly tense and frustrating board meeting. As he casually entered the kitchen, intending to grab a quick drink, he unexpectedly overheard voices coming from the nearby laundry room. He paused abruptly, sensing something was amiss. It was Amelia speaking in hushed tones to Maria, the elderly, kind-faced housekeeper who had worked for the family for many years. Maria was sitting slumped heavily on a chair, her hand pressed firmly to her abdomen, her face etched with pain. "Don't worry," Amelia said gently but with unwavering firmness. "Just sit and rest for a moment. I'll take you to the doctor right away. Just tell me where you keep your medicine." Lucian lingered just outside the door, peering discreetly through a narrow crack. Amelia was diligently folding towels, her movements quick and efficient but unhurried. Maria shook her head weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Miss Amelia, you really don't have to. I just need a minute to catch my breath." "No," Amelia interrupted kindly, her voice leaving no room for argument or further discussion. "You've been complaining about this stomach pain all week. I'm calling a taxi right now, and I'm going with you to the doctor. Don't argue with me, Maria. You know you won't win." She smiled warmly, a kind, genuine smile Lucian had genuinely never witnessed before. Maria chuckled softly and nodded in reluctant agreement. Lucian quietly stepped away before they noticed his presence, but the unexpected image was already burned indelibly into his mind. He had always perceived Amelia as cold, guarded, and somewhat standoffish, but the girl he had glimpsed in the laundry room was undeniably kind, deeply attentive, and genuinely ready to help a woman she barely even knew. She wasn't putting on an act for anyone. She wasn't trying to earn points or gain favor. She helped simply because that was who she was, deep down. For the first time, Lucian felt a surprising flicker of admiration, though he quickly attempted to extinguish it, telling himself it was foolish. "She's just a part of the contract," he stubbornly reminded himself. But the voice in his head no longer sounded quite so sure or convincing. A few days later, Lucian unexpectedly caught sight of Amelia in the living room, engrossed in a video call with her younger sister. She was curled up comfortably on the plush couch, smiling radiantly as Lily excitedly told her about a recent high test score. "I told you, you're 10 times smarter than me," Amelia teased affectionately, her voice brimming with genuine warmth. "Just keep working hard and focusing on your studies. College is definitely waiting for you." Lily laughed gleefully and then said something that made Amelia pause momentarily. "No, I'm fine," she replied softly, her tone reassuring. "I'm just working a lot lately, that's all. How's Mom feeling?" Lucian stood halfway up the grand staircase, pretending to intently check his phone, but in reality he was shamelessly listening to every word. That's when he realized that Amelia had deliberately never told her family about the existence of the marriage contract. She was skillfully hiding everything, from her life in the opulent mansion to the immense pressure she was undoubtedly under. She didn't want her beloved mother or sister to worry about her, even though she was single-handedly carrying the considerable weight of their entire future on her slender shoulders. A strange, unfamiliar feeling bloomed within him. Not anger, not idle curiosity, but something far closer to deep-seated guilt and genuine respect. When Amelia finally ended the call and stood up to leave, she didn't notice Lucian standing nearby. She smoothed her hair absently and let out a long, tired breath. The radiant smile abruptly disappeared, revealing the profound exhaustion that she always kept carefully hidden from the outside world. Lucian silently watched her walk away, his chest tightening with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He had essentially forced her into this uncomfortable marriage, initially assuming that she would eventually bend to his will or try to manipulate him, as so many others had done in the past. But she hadn't. She resided in his house, but her soul clearly belonged elsewhere, in a world of selfless sacrifice, genuine love, and quiet resilience. Lucian stepped out onto the expansive balcony, gazing down at the beautifully illuminated, moonlit garden. The poignant image of Amelia laughing with her sister replayed vividly in his mind, so real and powerful that he couldn't seem to shake it. For the first time, he found himself asking, who is she really? Not just the headstrong waitress who had dared to stand up to him that fateful day. Not simply the reluctant bride in a legally binding contract, but Amelia Harper, the strong, independent woman behind those undeniably defiant eyes. And he knew, whether he liked it or not, that probing question simply wasn't going to leave him alone. Still following the unfolding story? If this intriguing tale somehow found you outside of Soul Stories, we cordially invite you home to where every touching story begins with truth, unwavering hope, and heartfelt emotion. The gala at the prestigious Imperial Hotel, one of the year's most highly anticipated social events, was essentially a dazzling stage for the city's elite to unabashedly flaunt their immense power and carefully cultivated alliances. The grand ballroom shimmered brilliantly under the soft glow of countless crystal chandeliers. Exquisite designer gowns swept elegantly across the polished floor, and the sound of carefree laughter rang out merrily over the gentle clinking of delicate champagne glasses. Amelia, looking stunning in a deep sapphire silk gown that Lucian had meticulously arranged for her, entered gracefully on his arm, her hand resting lightly on his, playing her part in the carefully rehearsed happy couple act that the strict terms of their contract demanded. She was undeniably uncomfortable in such a setting, but she fully understood that she had to uphold Lucian's meticulously crafted public image, at least for the duration of the evening. Lucian, impeccably dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, moved effortlessly through the throng of people with his usual cold, unwavering confidence. He shook hands firmly with important investors, exchanged polite, rehearsed words with powerful business partners, and occasionally introduced Amelia with a neutral, almost robotic, "my wife." As if he were simply reading a bland line directly off a script. Amelia smiled dutifully at all the right moments, answered questions with carefully practiced, polite grace, but her eyes remained distant and unfocused. She knew she didn't truly belong in this glittering world, and she harbored absolutely no desire to. Midway through the evening, Amelia unexpectedly spotted a familiar face near the crowded bar. It was Ethan, a former coworker from the cozy cafe she had worked at before her brief stint at Liel, sporting his signature tousled curls and friendly, welcoming grin. Ethan noticed her and waved enthusiastically. "Amelia! Oh wow, it's been forever," he exclaimed cheerfully, approaching her with his usual cheerful energy. Amelia smiled genuinely for perhaps the first time that night. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Just working," he said with a casual shrug, motioning to the tray of drinks he was expertly balancing in his hand. "And you, rumor has it you actually married a billionaire?" He raised an eyebrow teasingly, though there was absolutely no malice in his playful tone. Amelia chuckled softly and shook her head in amusement. "Don't believe everything you read in the tabloids. It's complicated, to say the least." They chatted amicably for a few minutes, fondly reminiscing about their hectic cafe shifts, countless burnt cappuccinos, and the endless stream of cranky, demanding customers. Amelia's genuine laugh was warm and entirely natural, the kind of laugh she rarely allowed to escape within the confines of Lucian's mansion. From across the crowded ballroom, Lucian, who was deeply engaged in conversation with a group of prominent businessmen, glanced almost imperceptibly in Amelia's direction. He saw her laughing animatedly, her eyes sparkling with genuine light as she spoke with a complete stranger. His hand tightened almost involuntarily around his champagne glass, an unfamiliar heat rising unexpectedly in his chest. Jealousy? No, he quickly told himself. He had absolutely no logical reason to be jealous. Amelia was just a part of a contract, nothing more, nothing less. But why couldn't he seem to look away? Why did the genuine smile she was so freely giving to that man bother him so much? Without giving it another moment's thought, Lucian confidently strode across the expansive floor, slipped his arm possessively around Amelia's slender waist, and pulled her firmly against him, abruptly cutting off her conversation with Ethan. "Excuse us, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but undeniably sharp, and then quickly ushered her out into the dimly lit hallway. Ethan blinked in surprise, instinctively about to protest, but Amelia gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod to indicate that she was okay, then dutifully followed Lucian. The hallway was dimly lit, illuminated only by soft sconces that cast long golden shadows. Lucian abruptly released her and turned to face her, his eyes blazing with barely suppressed anger. "What were you doing?" he demanded, his voice raised slightly in indignation. "You are my wife, and you were openly flirting with another man right in front of everyone. Are you intentionally trying to make me look like a complete fool?" Amelia stood perfectly still, momentarily stunned by his abrupt outburst, but only for a brief moment. Then she calmly crossed her arms and looked him directly in the eye, completely unflinching. "You have power, Lucian," she said, her voice calm but with an undeniably cutting edge. "But you've never actually learned how to use it wisely. That man is just an old coworker. We were simply talking. If that somehow threatens your fragile pride, then the problem is entirely yours, not mine." Her words landed like a sharp slap to his face. Lucian faltered noticeably, his mouth opening slightly in surprise. But no words actually came out. The stark truth in what she had said, that his over-the-top reaction was more about his own deep-seated insecurity than anything she had actually done, left him momentarily speechless. He stared intently at her, standing tall and proud in that stunning sapphire dress, her gaze firm but not cruel. For the first time, he truly realized that he couldn't overpower her, no matter how much perceived authority he actually held. He turned away abruptly without uttering another word and strode purposefully toward the large window at the end of the long hallway, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Amelia remained perfectly still, her heart racing not from fear or intimidation, but from genuine surprise. She had fully expected him to lash out verbally, as he had done at Liel, but instead, he had simply gone completely silent. And that tense silence, though undeniably cold, felt strangely different, as if he were actually fighting something intense deep inside himself. She returned to the crowded ballroom with a perfectly composed face, but her mind was undeniably spinning. Why did she feel an unexpected pang of sadness at Lucian's unusual silence? He had essentially forced her into this unwanted marriage, controlling her every move with the crushing weight of her family's debt. So why, for one fleeting moment, had he seemed not like a ruthless enemy, but simply human? That night, back at the mansion, Amelia went straight to her room and firmly shut the heavy door behind her. She sat heavily on the edge of the large bed, drawing her knees up to her chest, her eyes drifting to the window, lost in thought. The unexpected image of Lucian standing alone in the hallway replayed in her mind over and over again. She tried to convince herself that she didn't care, that he didn't deserve her sympathy or understanding, but deep down, a quiet question whispered persistently in the back of her mind. Was there something more to him, something in him that she simply hadn't seen yet? Was Lucian Vale truly more than just a powerful, wealthy man? She shook her head abruptly, trying desperately to push the unsettling thought away. "It's just a contract," she whispered aloud, as if to remind herself of the cold, hard reality of her current situation. But when the lights were finally off and she lay silently staring up at the ceiling, she simply couldn't deny it any longer. This unexpected confrontation had left something entirely unexpected behind. Not anger, not fear, but a reluctant, unsettling curiosity about the real man behind the high, impenetrable walls that Lucian Vale had so carefully constructed around himself. In the expansive, glass-walled office located at the top floor of Vale Enterprises, Lucian sat completely alone, his eyes fixed intently on the confidential file that Marcus had just personally delivered to him. It wasn't just another routine report. It was a far deeper look into the surprisingly complex past of Amelia Harper. Not just cold, hard numbers and basic family circumstances, but the surprisingly compelling story of a remarkable woman who had once been a true rising star before her entire world unexpectedly collapsed around her. The detailed file contained everything, meticulously documented. Amelia, 25, had once received a full, prestigious scholarship to Stanford University, majoring in law. Her professors had unanimously predicted that she would undoubtedly become one of the top legal minds of her generation. Her impeccable academic record was flawless, page after page filled with perfect grades and glowing recommendations. But 3 years ago, when her father, Richard Harper, suddenly declared bankruptcy after a disastrous string of incredibly reckless loans, Amelia had inexplicably walked away from it all. No clear explanation, no formal withdrawal forms. She simply disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a promising dream and stepping into a bleak world of crushing debt, immense responsibility, and sheer survival. Lucian turned each page slowly and deliberately, pausing thoughtfully at a meticulously copied version of an old academic transcript, a flawless row of straight A+ grades accompanied by a glowing professor's note that read, "Amelia Harper possesses a rare sharpness of mind and an unshakable resolve." He frowned slightly, trying hard to picture that strikingly different version of her. Not the struggling waitress he had encountered at Lille, not the reluctant bride trapped in his contract, but the ambitious woman who had once genuinely dreamed of changing the world with her powerful voice. He silently asked himself, what kind of incredible strength does it truly take to keep going when life cruelly strips absolutely everything away? That night, in the unsettling stillness of the vast mansion, Lucian found himself completely unable to sleep. He stepped out onto the balcony with a glass of expensive whiskey, but his restless thoughts were far from the present. Unexpected images of Amelia unexpectedly stirred buried memories he had long since tried to suppress. He thought back to his own difficult childhood, spent in an old, crumbling house located on the desolate outskirts of town. His loving mother had tragically died when he was just 10 years old, leaving him alone with a volatile, often drunken father. Lucian had been forced to learn how to survive completely on his own by the time he was just 15, working countless odd jobs, saving every single penny he earned, and promising himself fiercely that he would never be weak or vulnerable again. He had painstakingly built his vast empire from that intense pain, but the deep scars had never fully healed. Now, he suddenly realized that Amelia wasn't actually so different from him, after all. Life had unexpectedly cornered them both. But where he had stubbornly built towering walls of immense power and impenetrable silence, she had deliberately chosen a strikingly different path. She didn't shut the rest of the world out. She worked diligently at 2 demanding jobs, laughed freely with her beloved sister, and generously helped complete strangers, like Maria, the kind housekeeper she had insisted on taking to the doctor. She never complained, not even once. She just kept going day after day. For the first time, Lucian stopped seeing her as just a stubborn debt holder or the strong-willed woman who had dared to challenge him at Lille. He saw someone who had been deeply wounded by life's harsh realities, and yet still consciously chose to respond with unwavering kindness. One evening, unexpectedly returning home earlier than usual, Lucian distinctly heard Amelia's voice coming from the cozy living room. She was engrossed in another video call with her younger sister, Lily. He paused silently at the top of the grand staircase, not truly intending to eavesdrop, but completely unable to walk away. "I know, Lily. The exams are really tough," Amelia said, her voice playfully reassuring. "But you're incredibly smart. I know you'll do great. Don't you worry about the money, okay? Just focus on your studies. I'll take care of everything." There was a brief pause in the conversation. Then Lily must have asked something that clearly caught Amelia completely off guard. "My dream," Amelia echoed softly, then let out a quiet laugh tinged with undeniable sadness. "I wanted to be a lawyer, remember? To help people who don't have a voice. People like Mom, like you. But sometimes life simply doesn't go the way you plan it to. It's okay. What truly matters is that you get to chase your dream." Lucian stood frozen in place, his heart suddenly tightening with a strange mix of emotions. He had honestly never once wondered about her dreams, never even stopped to consider what she had willingly given up just to hold her struggling family together. It wasn't just a crushing mountain of debt that she was so bravely carrying on her shoulders. It was their entire future, their unwavering hope. And he, through the legal confines of a cold, calculated contract, had trapped her in yet another gilded cage. For the very first time, deep-seated guilt settled heavily in his chest. He stepped quietly downstairs, intending to slip back out unnoticed, but stopped near her closed door. The room had abruptly gone silent. Amelia had apparently ended the call. He slowly raised his hand, feeling oddly tempted to knock gently on the door. He desperately wanted to say something, anything at all. An apology, perhaps, or just to ask if she was okay. But his hand hovered hesitantly, then dropped limply to his side. He, Lucian Vale, a man who had never sincerely apologized to anyone in his entire life, suddenly didn't know how to even begin. He feared meeting her probing eyes, not because they directly accused him of anything, but because they simply saw straight through him. Just like at Lille, her unwavering honesty stripped him bare in a way that no powerful enemy ever had. So he simply walked silently away. Back in his dark room, Lucian lay wide awake in bed, staring blankly up at the ceiling, Amelia's quietly spoken words echoing hauntingly in his restless mind. I wanted to help people who don't have a voice. Her quiet strength and unwavering resolve haunted him far more than any direct threat ever could. She was no longer just a contractual obligation, no longer simply a girl burdened by crushing debt. She was someone who had bravely endured the same kind of intense pain that he had. Yet, she had still stubbornly chosen to remain remarkably soft, genuinely generous, and incredibly strong. That night, Lucian found himself completely unable to sleep. He got out of bed, opened his laptop, and typed Amelia Harper into the search bar again. Not to further investigate her or gain some kind of manipulative advantage, but simply to find her. Anything more about who she truly was, a mention of her prestigious scholarship, a positive news article, but there was barely anything to be found, just a few brief lines mentioning her acceptance to Stanford, nothing more. It was almost as if she had deliberately erased herself from the world, as though she simply didn't want to be remembered. And for the first time, Lucian felt a strange, unfamiliar ache deep inside. Not for increased control or power, but for true understanding. He didn't want to know her in order to further manipulate her to his own ends. He genuinely wanted to know who she really was. The quietly strong woman who was steadily changing the way he saw himself, and the entire world around him. The annual charity gala at the Aurora Convention Center was a grand display of excessive glamour. A place where the incredibly wealthy openly flaunted their manufactured generosity, like a prized designer accessory. Crystal chandeliers sparkled brightly overhead. Exquisite silk gowns swirled gracefully across polished marble floors, and the constant clinking of champagne glasses mingled noisily with polished, performative laughter. Amelia, looking stunning in a long silver gown that Lucian had carefully chosen, stood silently beside him, dutifully playing the perfect wife, as the strict terms of their binding contract dictated. She smiled politely when introduced, responded gracefully to endless questions, but her heart was far away, with her beloved mother, her younger sister, and the drastically different life she had so willingly traded to protect them from utter ruin. Lucian, as always, was the undisputed center of attention. He moved effortlessly among the generous donors, his voice calm, confident, and carefully practiced. Each and every word meticulously curated to further reinforce his carefully crafted public image. Generous, composed, and always completely in control. But every now and then, his eyes almost imperceptibly drifted to Amelia, not to simply monitor her every move, but as if he were intently searching for something more meaningful. After weeks of living under the same roof, he no longer saw her as just the quick-witted, sharp-tongued waitress from Lille. She carried deep wounds, just like him, and the quiet kindness she so stubbornly lived by made him feel oddly small. Midway through the elaborate event, Amelia unexpectedly overheard a cruel conversation that shattered her carefully constructed calm. Near the overflowing banquet table, a group of impeccably dressed women whispered harshly behind glittering clutches and delicate champagne flutes. "She's Lucian Vale's new wife," one sneered derisively. "A common waitress shamelessly climbing into bed with immense power and wealth. Please, she simply doesn't belong here. She's probably just a passing distraction." Another chimed in cruelly, her voice as sharp as shattered glass. Women like that always somehow find a way to trap unsuspecting men like him. It's textbook manipulation, really. Amelia stood frozen in place, her fingers tightening almost painfully around her delicate champagne glass. She'd certainly grown somewhat used to the constant whispers and judging glances, but tonight, the callous words pierced deeper, like sharp needles jabbing cruelly at her last shreds of hard-earned dignity. They weren't entirely wrong, she admitted sadly to herself. Not entirely. She wasn't Lucian's wife in the traditional sense that they all imagined. She was simply a part of a complex deal, a calculated bargain. But consciously knowing that undeniable truth did nothing to soften the sting of their harsh words. The intense pressure of the crowded room closed in relentlessly around her, crushing and suffocating. She slipped away quietly, exiting through a side door to the secluded back terrace without drawing any unwanted attention to herself. Rain had just begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, quickly soaking into the ground and chilling her skin. She stood beneath a large tree, not really seeking any actual shelter, simply letting the cold rain wash over her. Water streamed down her face, but she didn't bother to wipe it away. She closed her weary eyes tightly and deliberately let it all fall. Every cruel word, every deep ache, every painful reminder that she simply didn't truly belong in Lucian Vale's opulent world. Inside the bustling ballroom, Lucian was mid-conversation with an important potential sponsor when he suddenly noticed that Amelia was no longer standing at his side. His eyes quickly scanned the crowded room, sharp and swift, until a nearby staff member hesitantly mentioned seeing her slip quietly away after unexpectedly overhearing a particularly cruel exchange from a group of gossiping women near the overflowing buffet table. Lucian didn't need to hear any more. He abruptly left the important ballroom without offering even a perfunctory excuse, completely ignoring the puzzled stares and half-raised champagne glasses. A moment later, he found her standing completely alone in the pouring rain, drenched from head to toe, the expensive silver gown clinging tightly to her slender frame like a second skin. She wasn't visibly shivering. She wasn't audibly crying. She simply stood there perfectly still in solitary silence, as if the cold rain were the only place where she could truly breathe. He quickly grabbed a large umbrella from a nearby attendant and stepped out into the downpour. "Amelia," he said softly as he carefully held the umbrella over her, his voice noticeably lacking its usual cold edge. She startled slightly and slowly turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed but undeniably proud, narrowed slightly. "What are you doing out here?" Lucian didn't answer right away. He intently studied her delicate face. Wet strands of dark hair clung to her pale cheeks. Her soft lips trembled slightly from the biting chill, and he detected a profound look in her beautiful eyes that wasn't simply fear or anger, but deep, worn-out exhaustion. A sharp pang of something akin to guilt stirred unexpectedly in his chest. He had undeniably trapped her in this complicated life. She certainly didn't deserve to be publicly shamed for it. "You should come inside," he said, his voice strangely gentle but firm. "You'll catch a terrible cold." Amelia turned away abruptly. "I don't need your concern," she said, her voice slightly hoarse from the unexpected chill. "I just need a minute to myself." But Lucian didn't leave. He actually stepped closer, shifting the umbrella slightly to cover her completely, even as his own broad shoulders began to soak through. And then, without consciously thinking about it, he reached out and gently pulled her into his protective arms. Amelia immediately stiffened, her hands rising instinctively, as if to physically push him away, but then paused hesitantly. His unexpected warmth pressed reassuringly through the cold, wet silk of her delicate gown. And for one fleeting moment, the unexpected embrace didn't feel like an overt display of power or calculated control. It simply felt deeply human. "I honestly don't know what's actually happening between us." "Amelia?" Lucian murmured softly, his voice low and barely audible above the steady drumming of the heavy rain. "But I do know this for certain. I genuinely want you to stay." She didn't offer a direct response, but she didn't actively pull away from him either. Amelia stood perfectly still in his unexpectedly comforting arms, her heart pounding erratically, not from confusion or unease, but from something she hadn't consciously felt in a long time: sincerity. His spoken words were clumsy and unrefined. He wasn't consciously trying to win some complex deal or to further assert his considerable authority. He wasn't the powerful man who commanded entire boardrooms or ruthlessly owned mountains of debt. In this stark moment, standing exposed in the pouring rain, he was simply a man, and she simply couldn't deny the undeniable fact that her own heart was actually stirring in response. They remained like that for a while, silent but not at all uncomfortable, wrapped in the steady sound of the falling rain and the quiet ache of unspoken emotions. Lucian carefully held the large umbrella steadily over her head, his strong arms wrapped firmly around her. Amelia allowed the cold droplets on her face to blur with the complex emotions she hadn't allowed herself to consciously feel in a very long time. Eventually, Lucian slowly let go of her, his eyes meeting hers directly, not cold or guarded, but filled with deep, unspoken questions. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, her voice barely more than a whispered breath. Then she turned abruptly and walked back inside. Lucian stayed behind, still holding the black umbrella, silently watching her retreating figure. Rain steadily trickled down the side of his face, but he didn't move. For the first time in many years, something deep inside him quietly cracked open just a little bit, and he knew with a quiet, unwavering certainty that Amelia Harper was rapidly becoming someone he simply couldn't walk away from. Lucian Vale's vast mansion, once cold and glass-bound like an impenetrable fortress, was slowly beginning to soften, warmed by the quiet, unexpected moments unfolding between him and Amelia. Since their deeply moving embrace in the pouring rain at the exclusive charity gala, the invisible wall that had so long stood firmly between them had inexplicably cracked, revealing long-buried emotions that both had consciously kept carefully buried. They were no longer simply two complete strangers bound together by the strict legal terms of an uncomfortable contract, but two complex souls inching tentatively closer, undeniably uncertain, yet increasingly drawn to each other. One quiet evening, Amelia unexpectedly found Lucian in the expansive living room, idly scrolling through a seemingly endless movie selection on the oversized screen. "You actually watch movies?" she asked, a subtle hint of genuine surprise evident in her soft voice. Lucian shrugged non-committally, the corner of his mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes. You pick something." Amelia deliberately chose the emotionally charged The Notebook, knowing full well that it had the distinct potential to stir up intense feelings that she simply wasn't ready to consciously face. They sat on opposite ends of the plush sofa, but as the highly emotional film began, the physical space between them seemed to subtly shrink. When the iconic scene of Noah and Allie tearfully parting in the pouring rain unexpectedly appeared on the screen, tears unexpectedly began to slip silently down Amelia's delicate cheek. She quickly wiped them away, desperately hoping that he wouldn't actually notice, but Lucian did. He didn't verbally acknowledge her tears, or even say a single word. Instead, he simply reached over gently and guided her head onto his broad shoulder. His unexpected warmth startled her slightly at first, but then she gradually relaxed into it, allowing herself to melt into a rare, almost forgotten sense of genuine safety. "Don't you dare tell anyone that I actually cried during a movie," she whispered softly, her voice undeniably shaky. Lucian let out a quiet chuckle, low and unexpectedly soothing. "Your secret's completely safe with me." In that fragile moment, something undeniable surged powerfully within him. Pure, uncalculated love, unlike anything he'd ever consciously known before. But Amelia, even as she rested against him, Amelia felt a quiet unease creeping in. Does he truly love me? Or is it just because I'm his wife on paper? Their shared moments gradually became a habit. Together, they would read, Amelia immersed in legal thrillers, Lucian absorbed in business strategy, and slowly, painstakingly, they began to reveal fragments of their past. She spoke of how her mother taught her to knit, her voice laced with a soft nostalgia. Lucian, a man who rarely opened up, admitted he once dreamed of becoming an astronaut before the harsh realities of life forced him to grow up far too quickly. With each shared memory, each vulnerability revealed, they grew closer, forging a bond that transcended their initial arrangement. Lucian found himself admiring her resilience, her quiet strength that belied the challenges she had faced. He no longer saw her as merely the woman who had challenged him at Lille, but as the woman who had unknowingly illuminated the darkest corners of his existence, bringing light and warmth where there had only been shadows. His love for her deepened, becoming something wild, undeniable, and terrifying in its intensity. But Amelia, even as she recognized the sincerity shining in Lucian's eyes, couldn't completely silence the fear that gnawed at her from the inside. Every gentle look he gave her, every moment he made her laugh until her sides ached, came with a shadow, a persistent whisper of doubt. Would he love me if I wasn't the debt he rescued? Is this real or just a lingering echo of power and possession? That question intensified the day Vivian arrived. Lucian's former fiancée swept into the mansion unannounced, a whirlwind of entitlement and perfectly polished glamour. Her red dress was bold, a statement of defiance, and her golden hair gleamed, as if she were accustomed to always getting what she wanted. Amelia, who was arranging books on the shelf, paused, suddenly alert. Vivian didn't even acknowledge her presence, instead barking orders at the butler. "Get Lucian. I won't wait long." Lucian appeared, his face a mask of stone. He signaled for Amelia to stay put, then led Vivian into a private room, closing the door behind them. Amelia tried to focus on the bookshelf, but she couldn't tune out the snippets of conversation drifting from behind the closed door. "Lucian, you don't need to keep up this charade," Vivian purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That waitress." "Come on, Lucian," she continued, her tone becoming more insistent. "I'm willing to come back. Forget the shares. Forget the old contracts. We can start over." Amelia clenched the book in her hands, her heartbeat escalating rapidly. Would he go back to someone who belonged in his world? Someone who represented everything she wasn't? Lucian's voice broke through, low and firm, cutting through Vivian's manipulative words. "Vivian, you don't understand. I once forced someone to marry me. I'll never do that again. Not with you. Not with anyone." Silence hung in the air for a moment, thick with unspoken emotions. Then Vivian's biting reply shattered the quiet. "You love her. That girl with nothing but debt." Lucian's response was swift and sharp, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Leave and don't come back." Amelia turned away, her emotions a tumultuous storm, but something had shifted within her. Lucian had acknowledged his past mistakes. He hadn't chosen the easy path of familiarity or status. He had chosen integrity, honesty, and perhaps even her. That night, in an attempt to break the heavy tension that hung in the air, Lucian suggested they make pizza. Amelia agreed, craving something light and carefree to ease the emotional weight that pressed down on her. In the kitchen, laughter tentatively returned. Lucian clumsily spread flour everywhere, creating a cloud of white dust. Amelia, in a playful mood, dabbed a blob of dough onto his nose and giggled. "You look like a clown now." Lucian raised an eyebrow, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Oh, really?" He reached for the flour with mock seriousness, threatening to retaliate. Amelia shrieked, darting around the kitchen island, trying to evade his flour-covered hands. But Lucian caught her from behind, his arms encircling her waist, his hands, dusted in flour, brushing her cheeks. They laughed, breathless and giddy, their earlier anxieties momentarily forgotten. Then she stilled in his arms, and the laughter slowly faded, replaced by a different kind of tension. Their faces were close, too close. Their breath mingled in the air, and their eyes locked, communicating a silent language of desire and longing. Lucian looked at her, his gaze intense, full of everything he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. He leaned in slowly, his intentions clear, and Amelia, though her heart faltered for a fleeting moment, didn't back away. Their kiss was soft, hesitant, unsure, but undeniably electric, sending shivers down her spine. When they pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed a rosy pink. "There's flour all over me," she mumbled, self-consciously. Lucian gently wiped a smudge of flour from her nose, his voice low and tender, sending another shiver down her spine. I'm not complaining. In that moment, a wave of unfiltered, overwhelming love surged through him. It wasn't something he could control, a strategic move in a game of power. It wasn't part of a contract, a calculated obligation. It was real, raw, and undeniable. After dinner, they stood by the sink, washing dishes side by side, their movements synchronized in comfortable silence. Amelia passed him a plate, and their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through her. She looked up, met his gaze, and saw warmth, sincerity, and a steadiness that calmed her racing heart. She smiled, radiant and bright, her face illuminated by the kitchen light. Yet, deep inside, the insidious tendrils of doubt still lingered. Is this real love, or just a part of the role I was forced to play? Lucian saw that smile and felt his heart tighten, overflowing with love and a fierce protectiveness. But he had no idea that she was still grappling with the very thing he thought they had overcome, the underlying fear that threatened to unravel their fragile connection. Under the harsh glare of the kitchen light, they stood closer than ever before, yet still separated by a shadow neither had dared to fully name, the shadow of the contract and the pain it had built upon. You're watching Soul Stories, exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. 3 months, like a fleeting dream, had passed within the glass fortress that was Lucian Vale's mansion. What had begun with cold silence and transactional boundaries had gradually blossomed into quiet dinners, clumsy pizza nights, shared books, and a hesitant, unforgettable kiss in a flour-dusted kitchen. Amelia had desperately tried to deny it, to rationalize it away, but she knew, deep in her heart, that she had fallen in love with Lucian, deeply and painfully. But the contract, like a relentless curse, never stopped echoing in her heart, a constant reminder of the circumstances that had brought them together. No matter how sincere his eyes, how tender his touch, she could never fully forget that it had all begun with a deal, a debt. What if Lucian only loved her because she had no choice but to be his? What if, without the contract, he would have never given her a second glance? When the final day arrived, Amelia made her decision, not because she didn't love him, but because she desperately needed to know that he truly did, that his love was genuine and unconditional. At dawn, as the first rays of light seeped through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the opulent rooms, Amelia quietly packed her belongings. She took only what she truly needed, a few changes of clothes, a framed photograph of her family, a tangible reminder of her past, and an old law textbook, a symbol of her aspirations. She deliberately left behind everything Lucian had given her, the expensive silver dress, the untouched credit card, as if they belonged to a life she no longer recognized, a life that wasn't truly hers. In her small room, which had once felt like a gilded cage, now strangely hard to leave, she sat down at her desk and wrote a letter, pouring out her heart in ink. Every word felt like a sharp blade, slicing through her carefully constructed defenses. Lucian, she wrote, when I signed the contract, I thought these 3 months would be nothing more than a challenging ordeal, something to endure. But you showed me something else entirely. I saw not just the powerful man who used his influence to corner me, but the man with a kind heart, with hidden scars, and with a profound sincerity. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, deeply in love. But I need to know if you would have chosen me if there hadn't been a broken engagement or a mountain of debt hanging over my family. I'm leaving not because I want to, but because I have to. I need to know that our love wasn't born out of obligation, that it's something real and lasting. Thank you for showing me that I can still love. Amelia carefully folded the letter, placed it beside the keys to the mansion, a symbolic gesture of relinquishing her gilded cage, and slipped out the door before anyone could notice her departure. She was determined to leave without a scene, to vanish as quietly as she had arrived. Amelia had planned her escape meticulously. She had been diligently saving cash from extra shifts she had taken at the bookstore, She turned off her cell phone to avoid being tracked, and she had arranged to stay with an old college friend, Sarah, in a small, unassuming town hours away from the city, a place where she could disappear and hopefully find some peace. She didn't want Lucian to find her, not out of spite or anger, but because she desperately needed time to confront her own heart, to unravel the tangled emotions that threatened to consume her. Lucian woke late that morning, enveloped in a strange, unsettling stillness. He walked downstairs, hoping to find Amelia curled up on the couch with a book, the familiar sight a comforting start to his day. But the house was eerily silent, devoid of her presence. He called her name, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. There was no answer, only the unsettling quiet. When he stepped into her room, his heart plummeted. The bed was neatly made, devoid of any sign that she had even been there. The drawers of her dresser were empty, her clothes gone. On the desk sat a letter, a stark white rectangle against the polished wood surface. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, his mind racing with a sense of foreboding. Asterisk, for the first time in my life, I felt deeply in love. Her words pierced through him like a physical blow, sharp and painful. Lucian realized with a crushing weight of regret that he had loved her, deeply and irrevocably, but he had never actually told her. He had foolishly assumed that time would be enough, that his actions would speak louder than words, that she would somehow understand the depth of his feelings. Now he saw the devastating truth. He had allowed her to live in a constant state of doubt, never assuring her, never explicitly stating that she was more than a deal, more than a debt to be repaid. He clenched the letter in his fist, a searing pain seizing his chest. He immediately called her cell phone, only to be greeted by her impersonal voicemail message. He tried again, his anxiety escalating with each unanswered ring. Nothing. He knew, with a chilling certainty, what he had to do. He had to find her and finally tell her the truth. Meanwhile, Amelia stood at a quiet bus stop on the edge of the city, waiting, her heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The rain began to fall, gently at first, like a whisper, then steadily increasing in intensity. It clung to her hair, her coat, and her eyelashes, creating a shimmering veil around her. A small, worn suitcase rested at her side, containing the few possessions she had chosen to take with her. She looked down the rain-slicked road, her gaze fixed on the horizon, waiting, her heart aching with a raw and heavy sorrow. Leaving Lucian was undeniably the hardest thing she had ever done, a sacrifice that tore at her soul. But she firmly believed it was the only way to truly discover if their love could possibly survive without the tangled strings of obligation and the lingering doubts that plagued her. The bus finally pulled into the station, its brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The doors opened with a mechanical sigh, inviting her to step inside and begin her journey into the unknown. She hesitated for a fleeting moment, tears welling up in her eyes and slipping down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, determined to maintain her composure. "Be strong," she whispered to herself, a mantra of self-preservation. She resolutely stepped onto the bus, carrying her small suitcase and her shattered heart with her. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb and began to move, she looked out the window, her gaze fixed on the retreating cityscape. The familiar buildings and bustling streets blurred behind the rain-streaked glass, swallowed by the downpour. She didn't know what the future held, what awaited her in the small town where she was headed, but deep down, she clung to one fragile hope, a tiny spark of belief that refused to be extinguished. Asterisk, if it's real love, fate will find a way to bring us back together. Back at the mansion, Lucian stood on the balcony, the rain lashing against his face, Amelia's crumpled letter clutched tightly in his fist. Below him, the city pulsed with life, a vibrant tapestry of lights and sounds. But all he could feel was the gnawing hollowness of her absence, the deafening silence she had left behind. The ache of losing her consumed him, a searing pain that threatened to overwhelm him. And for the first time in years, he didn't care about maintaining control, about projecting an image of power and invincibility. He only cared about her, about finding her and convincing her that his love was real, that it transcended the circumstances of their initial encounter. And now he had to prove it, to show her before it was too late. A week after Amelia left the mansion, Lucian existed in a disoriented haze, caught between waking reality and restless, dream-filled nights. The grand estate, once echoing with the sounds of their laughter as they clumsily made pizza or watched movies together, was now suffocatingly silent, a constant, painful reminder of her absence. Amelia's letter, with its mixture of heartfelt words and lingering doubts, lay on his desk, read and reread countless times, until the paper was worn thin and creased. For the first time, I've loved this deeply, but I don't know if you would have chosen me without the debt. Those words felt like an accusation, not directed at Amelia, but aimed squarely at himself, the man who had wielded his power to bind her to him, inadvertently planting the seeds of doubt in her mind and making her question the authenticity of the love they had found. Lucian couldn't accept the possibility of losing her. He had immediately ordered Marcus and his team to search everywhere, from train stations and bus depots to nearby towns and even the cafes where Amelia had once worked. But she had vanished, as if swallowed by the city. The very strength and intelligence he had once admired in her now became obstacles, making it even more difficult to track her down. Still, Lucian refused to give up hope. He realized that if he wanted any chance of winning Amelia back, he had to truly set her free, not just with empty promises, but with concrete actions that demonstrated his commitment to her freedom. He summoned his private attorney, Mr. Raymond, to the mansion on a particularly rainy morning, the downpour mirroring the turmoil in his heart. "Terminate all financial agreements related to Amelia Harper," Lucian commanded, his voice low but resolute, leaving no room for argument. "Her father's debt, her mother's house, deed everything back to them. Erase it all as if it never existed." Mr. Raymond, though understandably surprised by the unexpected request, asked no questions, a testament to his unwavering loyalty and discretion. Within 48 hours, every single document linked to the debt was officially annulled, legally nullifying any claim Lucian or his company had on Amelia or her family. Amelia's mother's house was fully transferred back to Mrs. Eleanor, with no strings attached, no remaining ties to Lucian or his firm. But Lucian knew that wasn't enough, that simply erasing the financial obligations wouldn't be sufficient to win back Amelia's trust and affection. He needed to tell her explicitly, unequivocally, that he loved her not because of the debt, not because of the contract that had initially brought them together, but because of who she was as a person, because of the woman she had become in his eyes. He sat down at his desk and wrote a letter, not long and elaborate, but filled with the raw, honest words he had never dared to utter aloud before. "Amelia," he wrote, "I was wrong to use the debt as leverage to keep you close to me. I mistakenly believed that power could control everything, even love. But I was wrong. I can't control my heart, and more importantly, I don't want to control you. I've erased every financial tie that bound you to me. You're free, completely and irrevocably free. But if you still feel something for me, if you believe that our love is real and worth fighting for, please come back. I no longer hold you. The choice is entirely yours. If you choose me, please come back to me. Lucian." He didn't entrust the letter to the impersonal postal service or even to his trusted assistant, Marcus. Instead, he decided to personally deliver it to Amelia's mother's small house in the suburbs, the place where he knew Amelia had often returned every weekend to be with her family. Mrs. Eleanor, Amelia's mother, her face etched with kindness and a weariness that spoke of the hardships she had endured, cautiously opened the door. "Mr. Vale," she said, her voice filled with surprise and a hint of apprehension. Lucian bowed his head slightly, a rare gesture of humility for a man accustomed to commanding respect and authority. "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm not here to intrude or cause any trouble. I simply ask that you give this letter to Amelia if she happens to return. It's very important." Mrs. Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes seeming to understand, with a mother's intuition, that this wasn't just an ordinary letter. It was a man's entire heart, laid bare on paper. Meanwhile, Amelia was staying with Sarah, her supportive college friend, in a small, quiet town 3 hours away from the city. She had taken a part-time job at a quaint, old-fashioned bookstore, surrounded by the comforting scent of aged paper and ink, trying to slowly rebuild her life, piece by piece. But despite her best efforts to move on, her thoughts and her heart remained stubbornly tethered to Lucian. Each night, as she lay in bed, she found herself replaying the memories of their time together. The stolen kiss in the kitchen, the gentle look in his eyes when she had cried during a movie, the unexpected moments of shared laughter. She often wondered if leaving had been a mistake, if she had acted impulsively and thrown away something precious. But her pride, her deep-seated need to know that his feelings were genuine and unconditional, wouldn't allow her to return without absolute certainty. One afternoon, after finishing her shift at the bookstore, Amelia decided to make a surprise visit to her mother and Lily. As she walked through the front door of her childhood home, Mrs. Eleanor handed her a sealed envelope, her eyes filled with a knowing and meaningful expression. "Someone came by while you were out," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Amelia took the letter, her hands trembling as she immediately recognized Lucian's distinctive handwriting. She carefully opened the envelope and began to read each line, her eyes scanning the words, tears silently welling up and streaming down her face. "I no longer hold you." Those 4 simple words shattered the carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart to protect herself from further pain and disappointment. Lucian hadn't just ended the contract, dissolving the legal and financial obligations that bound them together. He had relinquished his power over her, returned her freedom, not with empty promises or flowery declarations, but with tangible actions that spoke volumes. And he had asked her to come back, not out of a sense of entitlement or a desire to maintain control, but out of love, pure and unadulterated. Amelia retreated to her childhood bedroom, the letter clutched tightly in her hands, tears streaming down her face, blurring the ink on the page. She sat on the edge of her bed, surrounded by the familiar comforts of her past, and thought about the 3 months she had spent with Lucian, the whirlwind of emotions, the unexpected connections, the undeniable chemistry that had sparked between them. From their initial confrontation at Lucille, their first uneasy alliance, to the tender embrace in the rain and the unforgettable kiss in the flower-dusted kitchen, every moment, every interaction, replayed in her mind with vivid clarity. She had fallen in love with him completely and irrevocably, and now she knew with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that he loved her in return, not because of the debt, not because of the circumstances that had initially brought them together, but because of who she was, because of the person he had seen beneath the surface, the person she had been afraid to reveal to the world. After a day filled with quiet reflection, Amelia finally made her decision. She would go back to him, not because of any sense of obligation or pressure, but because her heart had already made its choice, guiding her with an irresistible force. She returned to the city, arriving at Lucian's mansion on a misty evening, the same mansion she had left just a week earlier, feeling like a completely different person. When Lucian opened the massive front door and saw her standing there, her hair damp from the mist, her eyes steady and unwavering, his heart nearly stopped beating. The sight of her, standing before him once again, filled him with an overwhelming sense of relief and a cautious hope. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. She stepped inside the grand foyer, saying nothing at first, just looking at him intently, as if searching for the truth in his eyes, needing to confirm that what she had read in his letter was genuine. Then she finally spoke, her voice soft but sure, filled with a newfound confidence. "I choose you, Lucian, not because of any debt, not because I owe you anything, but because I love you." Lucian stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and gently pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if afraid she might vanish again if he released her. Amelia wrapped her arms around him for the first time without any hesitation or reservation, feeling a love that was unburdened by contracts, free from the shadow of debt. They stood there in the grand foyer of the mansion, the rain falling softly outside, but inside, their hearts had finally become one, united by a bond that transcended power, wealth, and circumstance. There were no more power dynamics, no more transactional arrangements, just 2 people who had found each other through shared wounds and the unwavering hope of a brighter future. Amelia rested her head on Lucian's shoulder, feeling his warmth envelop her. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Afraid you only loved me because of the debt, because you felt obligated to." Lucian shook his head gently, his voice low and filled with heartfelt sincerity. "I love you because you're Amelia, the woman who challenged me, the woman who showed me kindness and compassion, the one who made me want to become a better man." They held each other in silence, their embrace conveying all the unspoken words that had lingered between them for so long. No more words were needed because, in that moment, everything had finally been said, every fear addressed, every doubt erased. Their love, at long last, was completely and irrevocably free.